Question: should I be seeing Steve on this?
You
Or
don't
no?
see him? Do you see him?
No,
Oh, I see Jim.
Yeah.
I see Steve when he talks.
Oh, then you can change your view, Jim. If you look at your upper right, it'll say view, and it looks like there's 9 little dots. If you change that to gallery, you can see all 4 of us. If you don't, you only see the person speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hmm.
Do you have it, bro?
I'm looking for it.
It should be in the top right.
Yeah. It'll be a
9 little squares, a 3x3 configuration.
Yeah, well,
unless he's on his phone. I don't know what he's using.
I'm on my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on my phone. So it shows.
I'm not sure how to do it on the phone. Dan, do you know? For Zoom?
Let me see.
There's definitely a gallery view and a speaker view thing, but I don't use my phone.
That's all right. We'll roll. I don't want to hold it up. We're good.
All right, Jim. All right, let's get started here in a second. All right. Well, it takes incredible credibility and conviction to be able to put together the type of material these 2 gentlemen do. My brother and I are honored to be able to have 2 incredible leaders, journalists, reporters, also alum from the Mecca, Howard University in Washington, D.C. And we're honored to have Steve and Jim joining the program. Jim Trotter and Steve Wyche, thank you for joining the Twins Talking Up program. How are you, gentlemen?
Good. I appreciate you having us.
Thanks for having us. But wait a second. I mean, Jim, I think we're talking to like Bruno Mars squared right here.
It happens every time I go to Vegas or something. People are asking me, "Hey, are you the stand-in?" It
Oh,
was
Joe.
just tall. I had it pushed out a little more. I actually did look like him.
Wow. Okay. That
It's
means
not
you
as
got
famous.
you got some serious access out there then.
I do. Hey guys, this is Danny. So from time to time, as we're speaking, I'll say this is Danny, or David say this is David, so that the podcast audience knows who's speaking. As sometimes even though we look alike, we also at times come across and sound alike. If you tend to forget who's speaking, just listen to the one who's actually most eloquent, and then you know that is Danny. Yes, Dave and I've been competing since we were young. We actually went to Howard University together, as Steve and Jim has done. And so, Steve and Jim, please tell us a little bit more about your journey. How did you go from going to Howard University, deciding to go toward journalism, and then how you became actually one of the premier powerful voices in the field of sports? We would like to learn a little bit more about your journey because this is very fascinating.
Jim, you can start since you finished before me.
Okay. Well, before I get started on that, I think Steve and I both would like to also bring in Thomas Howard, who's our producer. He's also a Howard alum. So it's really the 3 of us.
Thomas Warren.
Oh, I said Thomas Howard.
Thomas.
There we go.
The Howard thing
Thomas
gets us every
Warren.
time.
I blame Steve for that because Steve was the first one who did it. So
Yep.
So now I do it. But Thomas Warren, he's our producer, also an HU alum. But for me, going to Howard, neither of my parents graduated from high school. And so college was never talked about a lot in my house. And fortunately, I had a couple of high school counselors who focused on minority students and wanted to push them in the right direction. Well, long story short, my senior year of high school, we had a Black Student Union state convention. And one of the forums at the convention, which was held at UCLA, was historically Black colleges and universities. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of HBCUs. And one of the schools represented was Howard. And so when that panel finished, I decided that that's where I wanted to go. And it was late in the spring. I applied, I got accepted, but at that time I didn't have the money to go. So I spent 2 years saving up to go. I went to Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, to get some general ed courses out of the way. And after that, after 2 years of that, I transferred back to Howard and just immediately felt at home. I knew I wanted to go into sports journalism. because, you know, even from high school, I knew I loved the games. I loved the competition, the camaraderie, but I also knew I wasn't going to be good enough to ever play at the NFL level. And so I wanted to find a way to stay close to the game without actually playing it, and journalism was that way. And that's kind of how I got my start.
Yeah, I mean, my story is very similar to Jim's. You know, and like Jim, you know, west of the Mississippi River, there's only one HBCU, and that's Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. And so I grew up in St. Louis, but, you know, even though my parents were Hampton Institute,
That's
not
right.
University, Hampton Institute graduates, you know, there was never really a lot of conversation in my house about me attending an HBCU, and I was getting recruited out of high school to play football. I didn't get one letter, you know, ever from an HBCU. They didn't have the budgets to come that far west a lot of the time. So I went to University of Missouri to play football. The coaches that brought me in got fired my redshirt year, and new coaches made it very clear that kind of if you weren't a starter or someone who was projecting to start right away, then, you know, they're going to bring in their own guys and they'll help you transfer. And so I was looking at a lot of other schools, none of which were HBCUs. And then a buddy of mine was like, you know, we should go to a black college. I'll transfer with you. Because where I grew up in St. Louis, it was all white. There were very few families of color, let alone black families. And so I was like, hey, that's a great idea. My mother was always asking me about that. So I applied to Hampton. I applied to Howard. Howard got back to me first. I was going to go play football there, and got there, decided not to play, and focus on journalism. I'd always wanted to do it. My father was a sales rep for the NBC affiliate in St. Louis. I was always around the media. And so I was involved at school newspaper in high school and things like that. So got to Howard, and like Jim said, felt at home immediately. You know, I was always worried, and I think a lot of people from my circumstance, maybe Jim, I don't want to speak for him. Sometimes you're like, you know, I grew up around all these white kids. Am I going to be black enough to fit in at an HBCU? And within a day or two, I was like, yep, love it here. It was fantastic. And as all of us know, those are some of the best years, you know, of our youth, our young adulthood, that we could ever imagine.
I appreciate you both sharing that. This is David. And for Dan and I, we grew up as military brats, grew up around the world, and we didn't know what diversity really meant until we went to Howard. People say, oh, you're going to go to Howard. It's so diverse. Diverse? It's all black. No, Dave, It's diverse. Yes. Caribbean, African. I mean, we really were exposed and instantly fell in love with our experience at Howard. You can't beat it. And I love how you said that, Steve. When people give me that debate, the real HU, I don't even go there with them. I'm like, there's nothing about the real, because you were an institute. But I have much love for my Hampton brothers. I want them to do well and succeed. They're just not the real HU.
No.
So before we get into more of your career as journalists and reporters, specifically focusing on the NFL and your other work, I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about your Huddle and Flow podcast. I love listening to it. It's incredible. Like you said, your producer's also a Howard grad. I love that. The chemistry you guys have. What have been some of your favorite interviews on the podcast so far? Not that I want anybody to feel like they're not your favorites, but I'm sure there have been a few that have stood out to you.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I think my favorite was probably DeMario Davis, because, you know, he of the Saints, he's an amazing human being. He was really good. And he was telling the story a lot of his daughter, who went through a cancer situation, and some of that. So I really enjoyed that. Jamel Hill, carry champion, was very good. We had a lot of fun on that one, Jim. There were just so many. I mean, it's really hard to say, because I mean, we learned so much. Like Sean Payton was really fantastic, talking about a lot of things. Soledad O'Brien was really good. Yeah. So there was just so many things. It's so hard, Jim, to kind of say which one was the favorite. Jameis Winston was fantastic. Yeah. Terry Fontenot, Brad Holmes, the GM of the Lions. He was great. I mean, there were just so many. You know what? Jalen Ramsey's got to be a top three. I think the Jalen Ramsey one has to be a top three as well.
Definitely has attitude.
No, the question is kind of like asking us which our children are our favorite. You know? There is no right answer. I mean,
but if you, that's true.
I can't pick one. I mean, Steph Curry was great. Chuck D was great. Nnamdi Asomugha was great.
Right.
I mean, you could just go down the list. And the thing that I think is so beautiful about it is that it's not all football. So, you get different stories about what people are doing, how they got to where they are, what's important to them, that sort of thing. So I can't pick one. Starting out, you go back to the very beginning with Ron Rivera being so open about his battle with cancer. It kind of set the tone. So again, you're asking me which of my children do I favor most or love most. I can't pick one, man.
I will say this though, Jim. I think one of the to me one of the most memorable moments. We had David Culley, the head coach of the Houston Texans.
That's right. That was a good one.
When Jim was really engaged with him, talking about his father, now his 94-year-old father, who has since passed since the interview, how he was able to tell him, "Dad, I'm finally a head coach in the NFL." And it was just like one of those moments where you just had to kind of sit back and just really appreciate, the glory and the blessings of everything. And in that moment, Jim and I were like, man, just to have David Culley tell us that was just absolutely captivating.
Yeah, that was amazing. I can't wait until we start digging into just your perspective on coaches in the NFL, but that was amazing. And you can take for granted those little things, but that means everything to him. That meant everything to his family to be able to do that. So I appreciate you sharing that, Steve. That was a great interview.
This is Danny. I want to say that I think it was a very much needed interview. A lot of people really didn't understand and know who David was, and to be able to get a little bit more in depth, a little bit more of his background. I really pray for a successful season this year for the Houston Texans and for him and his staff as well. Let's just continue on with that because I think this is very important to me, and I think the rest of the audience wants to know. All of us want sports to be colorblind, but we know it's not. Can we talk a little bit more about the diversity in football and the diversity in the NFL? We know that in the last Super Bowl, 3 of the 4 coordinators were African-American. And we know that in the league, 70% of the players are African-American players. By the end of each NFL season, we can expect typically 7 to 8 coaching changes, a whole bunch of coordinator changes going on in the NFL, but we still don't see enough of the diversity hiring. And thank goodness we had David. Of course, we had Ron Rivera, the Washington football team. But tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on how we could make this a better progression going forward. We've done a great job. The NFL's done a great job hiring more women as NFL assistants, and you see them moving up the front office as well as the field, which has been great. It's been fantastic. But in both of your opinions, what could the NFL be doing more? And do you feel like it is doing a good enough job moving forward?
Jim?
Well, I'll say this. It's kind of like what Byron Leftwich said to me. You're asking us to solve a problem that we didn't create.
Yep.
And so I don't think that it's on us to figure this out.
Yeah.
I think it's on the owners to figure this out because ultimately that's where it all starts and ends. So from my standpoint, I think we focus so much on the coaches that we take the spotlight off where it should be. And for instance, when we had Arthur Blank on the show, I think it's important that we hold people accountable. And it doesn't mean to be disrespectful, but it means to have a conversation that do you walk the walk? Do you walk what you talk? And for someone like Arthur Blank, you can't say to me that you're about diversity and inclusion and it matters and it's important. And I look at your organization, and only one of your top 19 executives is Black. So I think owners have to take a hard look in the mirror and say, are we going to be intentional, in terms of walking that talk? And I think more of them have to do with that. Look, as it relates to coaches, in my opinion, I think the key is that you have to have more diversity at the top levels of your organization. Because when a head coach is being hired, who's at that table when the decision is being made? Typically, it's not someone who looks like us.
That's
and
right.
A lot of times, even during the interview process, it's not someone who looks like us who is involved. So I would argue that before an owner makes a decision, usually the last person that has his or her ear when it comes to making a hire is either the GM or the club president. Well, we know there's only one Black club president in the history of the NFL. And we know that up until this offseason, there were only 2 Black general managers in the NFL. So if we're not even at the table when the discussion is taking place and the decision is being made, then how can we expect for different results? So from my standpoint, it starts at the top.
Jim's 100% correct. And look, even in society, when it tries to correct some type of diversity issues or societal ills, we often come to those who are being persecuted or in the minority for the answers. You know, we're always having to explain why we should be hired instead of the people who aren't doing the hiring explain to us why they're not hiring us. And there's always some excuse that just doesn't wash. And so, look, the NFL itself as an entity, as a league, has policies in place, has really done, you know, and Jim will attest to this, has really done a pretty good job of trying to incentivize through whatever means to get these owners to change their ways. But it's up to the individual owner. It is up to the thinking. And yes, we see now 5 Black general managers in the NFL. Okay, so that's a step, right? And so some of those general managers are hiring Black assistant general managers, you know, like we saw Brad Holmes do with Ray Agnew in Detroit, you know, and things. And so maybe that's a start, but no one should be patting themselves on the back because we're nowhere near. And look, it's not just with clubs. You know, I just talked about how the NFL's got all these measures in place, but you look in their office at the very top. It ain't looking like no rainbow coalition up there, you know, and at our network, at our NFL network, we have 0 Black executives making decisions right there. You turn on the network, you see all, you know, a lot of Black people in the newsroom, a lot of former players, whatever on air. But the higher you go up in that building on that floor level, the more sanitized it gets. So, hey, you know, Jim and I have a forum to talk about it, but we're still down here on the ground floor of the elevator. The decision makers are at the very top. In fact, a couple of years ago, Jim and I, we went and proposed a podcast to do a podcast and got laughed out of the room. Laughed out of the room. It was Jim, you would say it was a pretty dismissive 30 minutes towards us. But of course, in the summer of George Floyd and all the happenings that happened there, all these big organizations wanted to become woke and aware. So all of a sudden the opportunity to do a podcast came about again. And so that's where Jim and I were able to kind of take this and do what we've done. But there's still, when it comes to decision making, I mean, I think most of you know, when you get on a Zoom call or an office meeting, ain't a whole lot of folks who look like us on those calls.
I agree. This is Danny, and I'm so glad you guys brought that up. Because I'm a speaker and trainer for Microsoft Partners, we know that the CEO, Satya Nadella, said that there are going to be more changes being made, including in the boardroom. So even if you happen to move up the ranks and make it into the C-suite, are you making it into the boardroom as well? And so he is instituting change to try to make that happen. And I'm so glad you guys have decided to go in there and just really start looking at how things go as you move up the stack. And I think because of us, the normal users, the normal audience members, we see on TV, we listen to your podcast, and we're thinking, oh my gosh, you guys have made it. And you're like, wait, what about when you start going up the ladder, the executive rank? Another thing that's popped in my mind as we talk about this is that during this draft, we had no HBCU football players drafted. And when I think about that, I think about Deion Sanders coming back, was in the running for the Florida State coaching job, decided to go to Jackson State. He's actually bringing a lot more momentum back to HBCUs. Do you feel that this is also going to help users at HBCUs who feel like, look, if I'm going to go play football and I want to ultimately make it into the NFL, I now have a path by going to an HBCU, whereas in the path, there wasn't really much of that in the path as well, because I feel like there is some change that are being made, but I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on that so that young men who are out there wanting to play in the NFL, is this a viable path for them?
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, that's a loaded question. Look, I think Deion and Eddie George now at Tennessee State. You know, of course, he's bringing Hugh Jackson with him to be his offensive coordinator. They're bringing more attention and focus to HBCU football programs. But does that mean you're still going to be able to get recruits there? If they don't have the budgets to go out and recruit and things like that, the name recognition will help. I mean, Deion's got some 3 and 4 star recruits coming to Jackson State now, and hopefully that continues some momentum. But when some of these 3 and 4 stars get to go to, you know, see the facilities at Oregon or Georgia or Alabama, it's different. I mean, so it's tough. So hopefully that from the recruiting standpoint and getting talent there, that helps, because we are seeing a renaissance in HBCU awareness. Our applications are up at HBCUs. Admissions are becoming more difficult to get in because of the number of applicants coming to certain HBCUs. So we'll see. But in terms of the teams, you talk about, there being no kids from HBCUs being drafted. I think only one's been drafted the past 2, maybe 3 drafts. I don't know the number. I think Jim may have the number, but look, a lot of it's because some of these scouts just aren't taking the time to go to a Prairie View or to go to an Alcorn State or something to really do their homework on them. COVID really negatively affected the FCS programs. I think only 6 players from FCS programs were drafted overall, because a lot of these guys didn't have a fall season. Some of them, not all of them, played a spring season, like Howard. They only played 2 games, both against Delaware State. I think only 3 MEAC teams played games in the spring. So that hurts, right? And so, that's part of it. We'll see next year when they play a full schedule, and hopefully, we can get the coaching and everything to get some of these players recognized, with some of the things being put in place with the HBCU Combine, the HBCU Legacy Bowl, things like that, to raise awareness. But, I just don't know. It remains to be seen. I mean, Jim and I have had this conversation. There are players at HBCUs who should get a shot to play in the NFL. But, we saw this year when the free agency hit after the draft, a whole lot, there's a good number of players from HBCUs who are getting opportunities. But again, getting them drafted and getting the recognition, we'll just see, because a lot, again, depends on the budgets and things like that. But the exposure absolutely has been heightened.
Yeah, I think Steve said it well. So, look, the reality is we've seen Deion go to an HBCU as a coach. We've seen Eddie George. And my understanding is there are some other high-profile former NFL players, including Hall of Famers, who have had discussions with schools about potentially taking on the job of head coach at some of these HBCUs. So I think we're going to see more of it. I do think that will have an impact in terms of bringing visibility to these programs. I do think it's ridiculous that only one was drafted, or because it, in essence, some would read that as there was only one worthwhile player to be considered for the NFL, which I don't believe to be true. Deion said that after the season. So, you just hope for the best. But, we'd like to say that if you are a player, the NFL will find you. And sometimes they're not going to find us in the round that we should be found, so to speak. And we have to go the long route in terms of being an undrafted person, but we make our way. And I hope at some point we get to that point where it's more level and it's true meritocracy, but we'll just have to wait and see.
And on that, guys, I mean, one thing, and Jim and I, I'm blanking right now. We had the head football coach of North Carolina A&T on.
Sam Washington.
Yep.
Sam Washington, right? He's got a running back. Jermaine, I think it's Jermaine Martin is his name. He's already being talked about as a likely draft pick. But a lot of these traditionally black conferences, like the MEAC and the SWAC, they're getting poached or they're leaving voluntarily. Teams are leaving. There's going to be a potential seismic shift. Like the MEAC may lose 3 or 4 teams. A&T and someone else is going to a different conference this year.
Yeah.
And I think there are some teams from the MEAC who could be joining the SWAC because some teams from the SWAC now are getting pulled into some other conferences, because there's more television rights and more television money. So just the overall traditional HBCU conferences as we know them, those could be busted up. Yeah. So it's going to be very interesting, again, to see how these black colleges, in terms of visibility, they may get more in some of these other conferences. Like, Tennessee State's been in the Ohio Valley for a while, right? But they may not necessarily be playing the traditionally black colleges and playing that schedule and having some of the things that go with it, the homecoming games, and the marching band competition, things like that, because the economics are driving them away from these historically black athletic conferences that we've known for years.
Yeah, this is David. I agree with that, Steve. I'll tell you, I went to the Howard games because I wanted to support my school, but I went for the band. I love the band. I love the music. There's nothing like HBCU football. And the direction of where these schools are going, you're right. I've been hearing a lot about these schools being plucked, at least from the SWAC. TSU has kind of made their stance. They're not going to go back to maybe the MEAC or the SWAC themselves, although they keep their game with Jackson State. But I would love to be able to see these schools get not just notoriety and get one of these offshoots, Maker, Maker, going there for a season, but we really be able to see these 4 and 5 star players all go there. Would be such a huge shift. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like in the next few years, if in fact these newer conferences like the WAC is now going to come and try to pull some of these HBCU schools. I do hope to see that the combine, the HBCU combine, is not just here as a gimmick, but that it's really going to draw some of the attention of the NFL to see the talent that we have some incredible talent out there. I wanted to ask you guys, when we think about the continued talk of the NFL and diversity, why do you feel like race is still a major factor when it comes to quarterbacks? We think about the quarterbacks in the NFL, the last few MVPs, we talk about Holmes, we talk about Watson, Wilson, there've been some incredible talent that have been African-Americans, and yet you still hear this narrative that, oh, they should switch positions, or maybe they're not as talented. They can't grasp the playbook that well. Justin Fields was the number 1 rated quarterback in high school, and yet he's coming out and falling down the draft boards because of opinions about him not working hard. And yet when I look at the Big Ten, they had a season because of Justin Fields. And so maybe it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Jim. It's got to change from the top, but it's just really awkward to continue to hear this same play over and over again, the same narrative, because they're African-American, they're not going to be as talented. I mean, Wilson played at BYU. Nothing against Wilson, incredible arm. But the talent level that he played against was a subpar to Ohio State's talent of what they played against. And yet nobody questioned if he should be number 2. So I'm just curious as to what thoughts there could be from the GMs. What can we do to change this narrative? I don't want it to be because they're Black, they can't play quarterback or grasp a playbook. It just seems unfortunate that that's still the talk.
No, I think the narrative is changing. I just think you have certain individuals who will still say those ridiculous things. And then during draft time in particular, everyone picks up on it because everyone is hungry for something and to talk about something. Look, the reality is, as Doug Williams said, I think it was week 2 or 3, there were 4 games, I believe, in which you had Black quarterbacks who were starting against each other. And he thought back to his playing days, to where when he played against the Chicago Bears and Vince Evans was the starting quarterback, that was the first time in NFL history that 2 quarterbacks who happened to be Black were facing off against each other as the starters. And I remember Doug saying to me that for him, that was huge, even more than winning a Super Bowl to some degree, because he had never thought that possible growing up. He never saw that growing up. So the way the college game has changed now, with so many offenses using RPOs and whatnot, they're putting some of their best athletes at quarterback. And we're seeing now the NFL have to adjust to that because it is drawing its talent, obviously, from the college game. So as you mentioned, the last 2 league MVPs have been quarterbacks who happen to be Black. The Super Bowl MVP 2 years ago was Patrick Mahomes. We're looking at the number of quarterbacks who happen to be Black who were drafted number 1 overall. That is increasing and becoming more regular. So the fact that you would have a Bill Polian or some anonymous personnel person say what he says, I'm not going to give them a lot of credence to that. That's always going to be there. Sure. Racism is always going to be there. So I choose not to focus on those limited individuals and rather focus on what we see as the trend. And the trend is that we are getting more opportunities and that we are succeeding.
Yeah. And again, and what Jim said, what's also changing, and here's where I'd like to see a little bit more progress is, we talk about the Black quarterback. Look, Kyler Murray was drafted 1st overall. We've got more Black quarterbacks coming in, and as Jim said, the style of coaching is changing as well. Why aren't there more Black quarterback coaches? And so that's where I'd like to see the next progression, because a lot of quarterbacks or a lot of assistant coaches who happen to be Black played quarterback like a Lamar Jackson, or played a style like Kyler Murray back in the day. These guys can relate a little bit. And as Jerry Rice, when we had him on the Huddle and Flow podcast, said, look, a lot of the stuff the NFL is doing now is what he was doing, at Mississippi Valley State, and a lot of the formations and a lot of the concepts. And it is. A lot of it is just kind of hybrid stuff that Eddie Robinson and John Merritt, these guys, were coaching at HBCU. So, I think the thinking is, as Jim said, I think it's now kind of almost an outlier in terms of someone coming public like Bill Polian and saying Lamar Jackson's going to have to switch to wide receiver. Well, no, there are coaches now who know how to play to his strengths. When people say, oh, he's got to be more of a drop back quarterback. No, he doesn't. No, Kyler Murray doesn't, because they're playing to his strength, and running is something that keeps defenses off balance. Why wouldn't you incorporate that into your offense? Some of the thinking is absolutely changing. And so again, I think we're going to continue to see more black quarterbacks continue to go, because frankly, we're looking at some of the best, the best players in the NFL happen to be black quarterbacks.
Yep, exactly.
Let me say this too. When you talk about narrative, I think we often don't include the media in this discussion, and we need to. And so I will say it use this example. And I'm not trying to single him out, because I think he's a good dude. And sometimes you get caught in tough situations. I've been there. But for instance, the whole thing with Justin Fields and Dan Orlovsky. Now, he went on air.
He did.
And disputed everything that had been said about Justin Fields, but then turned around and went on a podcast and said, well, this is what I'm hearing. Well, if you know what you are hearing is not true, it should be incumbent on you then not to repeat it. I don't care if it is coming from a personnel person. If you have already broken down the tape and said, all of these things are not true, and yet you repeat it, you give oxygen to it. Yeah. So I think it is incumbent on us in the media to stop perpetuating many of these stereotypes and many of these false narratives, because what do we know with personnel people during the draft? They tell us to our face, we are going to lie to you if it benefits us.
True.
And so teams will downgrade players, even though they don't believe it, hoping that player falls to them.
Yeah.
And so we in the media have to accept our accountability, our responsibility in this, and say that we're not going to perpetuate these stereotypes, or we're not going to put out information that even our own eyes tell us is not true. So I don't think we should be excluded from the equation.
Jim, this is David, and I'm glad you kind of segued into what I wanted to ask you both here about the media's responsibility and role when it comes to sports. I understand that so much of what you are doing is dictated from your producers or dictated from management, et cetera. I asked a reporter here in Baltimore specifically a question about, can he really speak his own mind and speak truth to a situation? And he said, Dave, I can and I can't. And so regarding—
What does that mean?
That's exactly what I was trying to understand. So regarding guys like Dan, he's up here speaking. He may not see the grass at the time. Maybe he doesn't have the training you guys do. Of course, he came from the NFL to be able to stop himself and say, I've got a responsibility to say something right here, but he didn't do it. And so how much of the media has to be able to say, can I stop? Can I say the right thing? Or will I get reprimanded when I go back to the studio? And so this is what I wanted to start asking you guys is, what is the responsibility you have personally for, let's say, every Jamil Hill? There might be somebody else willing to take that spot if they don't rock the boat. And so that's where I'm curious as to we talking about our conversation going forward is, what role can you really have? What responsibility level can you really take on as a journalist, as a reporter, versus wondering if your bosses or the powers that be might say, you got to shut that down. That's not going to work. And so I'm curious about what you guys' thoughts on it, because what we're going to talk about, what I want to ask you guys eventually, are things like Colin Kaepernick. I think, Steve, you broke that report when he decided to take a knee in protest. We talk about Naomi Osaka when she decided to withdraw from the French Open. And we're talking about, did the media have any type of role in that? Although I personally blame the majors and their leadership because they've set it up that way. But I wanted to ask you guys about the media's responsibility, and how do you look at what role do you have when it comes to these different, let's say, events in our society or with our sports or with our athletes?
Well, I'll start. I'll say it's never the media's role to tell an untruth. I don't care who's putting pressure on you. So that's fundamental. Look, all of us in the media at times will look another way if there is a situation that demands that you can't speak about. Look, here at the NFL Network, people know my position as it relates to telling the truth about the powers that be and holding them as accountable as we hold players and coaches accountable. And I was told that, look, we will always report the news, but there may be times that we don't opine on it. And I get that. But at no point has anyone ever said to me, we need you to play it this way for whatever reason, nor would I ever do that. So I don't know quite what that reporter was referring to that you spoke to. I just say, look, it's very fundamental. This isn't really complicated. You're a reporter. Your job is to tell the truth and to be as accurate as you can, and to make sure that any opinions you have are grounded in fact.
Right.
So, and not just to be up there gaslighting situations or people. So I don't, to me, it's an easy discussion. And I'm kind of confused as to people to media members who would knowingly go out and say something they know not to be true simply because someone above them in authority wanted it presented that way. I don't have words for that.
Yeah, look, it's as Jim said, it's very simple. I mean, when you talk about our responsibility is to be fair, to be accurate, and especially as Black journalists, to be good.
Yeah.
Right. So, Jim and I can't be out here just putting out information because we need to churn up volume. We need to aggregate and stuff like that. Our stuff's got to be information that is on point, consistently on point, consistently good. And we have got to carry ourselves professionally. And when we're not, on the camera or in society, we've got to carry ourselves a certain way. We don't have to, but people like Jim and I, we choose to. That is we were raised as, first off. But we want to, and I'm speaking for Jim here, just because I know the man's character. We want to have other people look at us and say, this is how we need to behave, and this is how we need to do our jobs. We do them well. We have the trust of so many people who we, call for information or whatever. Like they'll tell us stuff. People told us stuff on the podcast that they're not telling other. Sean Payton was an open book, right? Some people find him difficult. We're like, wasn't difficult with us that day. But I think it's part because Jim and I, the way we carry ourselves when it comes to responsibility, again, as journalists of color, we have got to be good because there are not many of us. You go to any press box, like during an NFL playoff game, let's say there's 150 people, and there might be 5 or 6 people of color, and there might be 5 or 6 women, 1 or 2 of whom might be women of color, right? So we're always, being held to being good and being great, so we don't get labeled as a malcontent or whatever. But most importantly, as Jim said it, if you're trying to be a good journalist, if you get into this profession, there's basic principles you stand on. You're taught those in Journalism 101. Again, fairness, accuracy, and to be consistently trustworthy with the information, that you're conveying. Yeah, we work for the NFL Network, but honestly, we work for our readers and we work for our viewers and work for our listeners, because without them, we wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Steve. This is David. And if I can ask a little bit more about, let's say, Naomi Osaka's situation. And there's been a lot of discussion about what the role of media is with that whole environment. And maybe she phrased it differently or wrong, if you want to call it that, in terms of saying, I don't want to speak to the media. But I really think it's been more of the organizers of the 4 majors of tennis and how they've structured it. But what could she have done, and what could they do differently going forward? I don't necessarily want it to be a situation where she's like Marshawn Lynch and just says Skittles or because I'm here, I don't want to be fined. But at the same time, there are some mental health challenges that are there. But I don't want it to be an attack on media per se. I'm not in your shoes, guys, to understand what that feels like. But I think that there were some that felt like it was a personal attack on them. Maybe it was. But there are other analysts out there that felt like she should have just done it anyways. I'm just curious from your perspective, how do you think, not that you're going to be the majors and change their structure going forward, but how do you think that the media from your perspective should handle that, her response, your response going forward? And are we going to see more of this with other sports?
Well, we saw it again yesterday after the U.S. Women's Open, where Lexi Thompson, her agent, cut off questions after
sure.
3 questions. So I think it's something now that we're going to run into. My feeling is, look, it's not a one size fits all. And I think the great thing about what Naomi did is that she opened up a discussion that was long overdue. And the reality is, and I don't care if other media members get upset at me, we do have some people who are in there looking to sort of gaslight a situation or a player, looking for that moment that brings attention to them. And I'm not saying in any way that that's the majority, because it's not. But I do think if you talk about Naomi's situation, going back to 2018, where she beat Serena and the crowd was booing because of an official's call in that match. And here you have this young girl who, in her biggest moment, has to deal with that and deal with it in a match in which she beat her idol. And she has said she has not recovered from that the depression and the anxiety is real. So I just don't believe there's a one size fits all. And I think you have to have that discussion about how it's going to be handled. I do think that professional athletes have a responsibility to deal with the media. The media are the conduit to the fans. The media are the ones who help provide those salaries that these athletes get. So I do think there is a responsibility there, but it doesn't mean that we can't look at a situation and say, how can we do it better? Excuse me. And I think that that's what is beginning to take place and what needs to take place.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's done some fantastic work in the mental health space with athletes. Some written pieces and some things that he's done. So he's really well versed on this. And I think, as Jim said, it's not a one size fits all. This was a personal thing for Naomi Osaka, saying she did not want to do this, and her reasons were that she has been going through all of this and the anxiety that she feels in dealing with news conferences. I mean, remember Ricky Williams back in the day used to do news conferences with a helmet on because he felt very uncomfortable having these microphones put in his face. It's not always easy for people to deal with that. And so maybe there are ways to navigate around that in some way, shape, or form. But, and again, I'm speaking as a member of the media. You are obligated. When you sign your contract, there are media obligations. And as Jim said, without us, look, someone could see if a running back goes for 150 yards, okay? But if there's a greater story behind the motivation, and we tell that story a lot of times, that may lead to endorsement deals, whatever. That's not our jobs. But these are things where that access can really help tell what the player looks like underneath the helmet. What he feels like or she feels like, in these situations, and how Roland Garros. They were really put in a tight box. But I do fear that more athletes, and we're starting to see some of it in the NFL because of COVID last year, where everything was Zoom, right? We were not in any type of personal contact with any of these athletes. And now we're hearing that we're not going to be allowed back in the locker rooms this year, right? They may bring players out in a controlled environment news conference, but, the access restrictions seem like they are steadily coming into play. And that's a difficult thing for a lot of times for us and the athletes to navigate, because there are athletes who may prefer a one-on-one conversation. Jim and I know people who will speak to us individually who may not give the same type of answers in front of 20 people asking them questions, or we get to ask questions in a certain way in private differently than you're going to ask them at a news conference. So, there's all kinds of things that are brewing here. But as Jim said, Naomi Osaka did create a discussion among athletes, especially young athletes, that needs to be had. Jim, remember when we had Tom Rinaldi on the podcast. And remember, Naomi she came out wearing a mask with different victims of police violence on these masks. And he asked her a question. She flipped it on him. Well, what did you think about me wearing these masks? And he was immediately put in like, whoa, how do I answer this? And he's like, no, I'm asking you the question.
Oh, goodness.
And so there was this, and he talked about how it was a really awkward, I guess, few seconds of jousting as to, how they were going to handle that. And so you could kind of see maybe some things she was going through there. And as journalists, the balance, that we have to walk, because we don't know everybody's situation that we're dealing with.
Yep. This is Danny, by the way. I love this, just to think about what you guys are saying from a different perspective, even from her perspective, and turning it back onto the interviewer. When I think about the field that you guys are in, and we're talking about this COVID situation post-pandemic, how it may be more difficult to get access to the athletes to ask specific questions. You stated earlier, Steve, that sometimes certain athletes like to just be one-on-one. How are you guys going forward? How are you able to gather more insights from these athletes, more conversation with these athletes now that you're not always allowed in the building, or sometimes you don't have the ability to grab these athletes all at once? How are you going to continue to produce these great contents? I mean, your podcast, Huddle and Flow, and everything you guys giving us great insight. Yeah, Sean Payton on. There's all the stuff that you guys are doing. How are you finding it more difficult to find the ability to access this information directly from the athletes, or are you getting more creative in order to find the ability to get access to this today?
Oh, it's more difficult. It's more difficult. I mean, it's without a doubt, because, okay, let's say I'm going out to the Rams to cover practice. Okay, pre-COVID, I could walk up to Jalen Ramsey's locker, right? I could go holler at Aaron Donald. Okay, but in these circumstances, they will pick a day. Okay, out of 53 players, you're going to get Aaron Donald maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a week. But you're going to get him in an environment where there's 15 people on a Zoom where you might not be able to ask a follow-up question, right? He may say something really compelling, but there's a little bit of gray area that you might not get that opportunity. And then someone else is asking a completely different question because they're writing a story or reporting on something with a completely different angle. And that nugget, that morsel of just like, whoa, there's going to be something bigger, is gone. It's in the ether, right? So it absolutely is different. So that's where you were hoping. And look, and this is where, like growing up, my colleague Jim, and reading him a lot. See, like Jim is a master interviewer, right? You hear it on the podcast, and when he hooks somebody, it keeps going and going, right? And when he has to do that on a Zoom, he may not have that opportunity to follow that up, and to keep that person on a hook and to walk them down the path that they're giving the piecemeal crumbs to, right? And so that's why with the podcast, I love doing this with Jim, because he gets these guys, man, and he gets them going. I'm like, man, Jim's putting on a clinic right here. And so that's the difficulty that we're having to do when it comes to great storytelling and great question asking. Because Jim asked, seriously, now, Jim, I'm bragging on you, but I see you smiling.
I'm laughing because Steve is great at this, at what he does too. He's putting this on me, but he's great at what he does too. So I'm sitting here like this, he's saying me, or in reference to me, and it's not me, it's him as well. So don't let him fool you. He's being modest. Steve does a great job too, man. I'm not trying to step back from the things we do, but here's the one thing that we're able to do, I think, on the podcast, and Jim and I talk about this, and Thomas, is we elevate the subject, right? We're going to ask them questions to get them thinking about stuff. Oh, okay, so we're going there. Okay, let's go there. And that's where the lack of access really, really hurts. And that's why I'm glad, with this podcast, we had the opportunity to get people on, because they're like, okay, now we can talk.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I love that. Yeah.
Danny, go ahead. I'm sorry, Dan, I'm jumping real quick.
Go for it, bro.
A lot of the current athletes will have their own YouTube channels, podcasts, where people just come on and just be real and just be themselves. And you see Cam has his own show, and he'll have a cigar, or he'll talk about what it's like being a vegan, keeping his body in shape. You have JJ Redick have his own little thing where he bring NBA players on. I think it's awesome where people can feel that they can be real, as you stated. And And that's one of the things that Dave and I both love about your podcast. You guys really vibe well off each other. You can kind of tell that you guys know each other really well inside and out, where you can actually start a sentence, complete each other's sentences. I just want to say I really appreciate all of that. And I wonder, did you believe that your background at an HBCU or something helped you as you guys got into this field of being in the media, being in journalism and all that? Did you feel like your time at HBCU, interacting with each other, knowing each other, did that kind of help a little bit? I just kind of want to see, what is it that helped you guys get to really have this great vibe that you have with each other when you're on your podcast? Because I feel like it works well. There's a lot of individuals who have podcasts where there's a lot of stopping and going where it just doesn't flow right. But you guys seem to have this flow.
It's true.
I appreciate that. It's not easy because you don't want to step on each other's toes. I'll say this. I think first and foremost, it starts from a foundation of respect. I respect Steve. I respect Thomas. And the other thing is a comfort level of knowing where they're coming from, that we're all approaching this from the same perspective in terms of what we're trying to accomplish or what we hope to accomplish, right, and how to go about it and doing it a certain way. So I think one, it's respect, and two, it's comfort. And, the fact that we share some of the same backgrounds obviously helps. And the other word I'll use is trust. I trust Steve. I trust Thomas. I don't trust a lot of people in the business. It's and it's not a rabbit hole I choose to go down now, but not everyone in this business has your best interest at heart. So I think when you get around people that you trust and you feel that they have your best interest at heart, you're able to do things. And I'm just speaking personally from my standpoint. That's what I feel about this. I trust Steve, I trust Thomas, and I trust that we're always striving for the same thing.
Yeah, we really, as I say, Jim and I, we're trying to elevate, and Thomas, we try to elevate each other. We try to elevate our audience. Everything we do is all about enlighten, elevate, educate. But I like that, the part of the question that, do you feel going to an HBCU has helped us, connect? Yes. In the journey, again, growing up with almost in a completely white environment, going to an HBCU, my awareness, my antennas are up now, right? There are things that I learned at HBCUs and just going to school with other people from different parts of the country and whatnot that allowed me when I transitioned into this, besides getting a great education and knowing how to be getting the real principles of journalism, to be a better man, right? To be a better human being. And so that's helped, and then Jim and I, we've known each other, Jim, for at least 20 some years, just along the way. So that's, that's really helped with a lot of the process. And I think that's, with just, and look, like I said, there's not many Black journalists doing what we're doing. So when we get around a Jarrett Bell, from USA Today, the late Therese Paylor from Yahoo and Kansas City Star, there's a bond. Daryl Ledbetter, our guy from Howard, who's in Atlanta, and then Jim and Daryl, and Jared, they're Hall of Fame selectors, so there's a lot of things that we're all kind of, intertwined with, and we share that really just help. There's just almost like this innate fusion of saying, okay, we really feel each other on certain levels, which really help, as Jim said, the trust in the relationship.
I appreciate that. This is Dave. That so much of what makes Huddle and Flow and your relationship so successful isn't just the shared background of going to the best institution of learning in the country.
Thank you. Preach it, scream it from the rooftop.
But it's also just that mutual respect for each other and what you guys are doing. Part of my job as a leader in my company, DSB Leadership Group, we focus so much on public speaking skills, storytelling skills. And part of being a reporter versus journalist is not just reporting what you see, the facts, but you're also looking for angles. And so you might have those outliers, or maybe it's more common in your industry, that are looking to stir the pot. They're looking for the edge to see if they can get that athlete stirred up. But then you have those journalists, those individual professionals that really love learning about the people they're interviewing. They want to find the angle to say, why are they the way they are? Why do they approach the game the way they do? Why are they such a factor in their community? That's storytelling. And that's what you guys are doing. That's what you do professionally. You're not just reporting the X's and O's. You're looking for why we as fans stay so involved, why we're so passionate, because we feel like we find ourselves in their life, in their story somehow. That's what you do. And so I want to give you guys a lot of kudos and props for that, because that is rare. And it takes an incredible talent, not just an education or a spot you've been given because you're in this company. It takes an incredible talent to put together the type of program and shows that you guys are doing. You guys are incredible storytellers. I want to share that with you.
Appreciate that.
Well, thanks a lot. And Jim will tell you this. Look, part of that, journalism's changed. You know, we were coming up. It is give the facts and let the readers decide, right? Or let the viewers decide how they want to take it. Now it's really putting things in context. It is really contextualizing things where you're not just telling the viewer, okay, this guy, you know, the bunt single he put down, you know, with 2 outs led to this. It's just like, here was the thinking behind it. And they've been setting up this type of play because they know the first baseman was tipping some, you know, there's a lot more context and nuance to everything we do. I mean, and Jim, look, there've been journalists who have not been able to adapt. They're dinosaurs, so they're out. Right. I mean, that's why even if we can't write a certain thing with a certain content, we can go on a podcast or we can do a digital hit to further enhance it. You know, look, a lot of the TV hits I do are 40 seconds. There is no way I'm going to put context in 40 seconds. You know, it's hard. So then we do a 2-minute digital hit, which really rounds things out. And that's where journalism has really, really changed because of social media, because long form journalism is now archaic, which is a damn shame in terms of too many companies don't want to have a brilliant piece because they think people only have a 24-second shot clock attention span. So they want short 6-paragraph stuff. So, you know, that's where things have really changed in the industry.
So what about, oh, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry. You were going to say something.
No, for me, the thing in the industry that's really changed is how the bottom line now drives everything.
Yep.
You know, I think back to when I came into journalism, when I graduated from Howard in '86, you had a lot of family-owned newspapers, and the profit margin wasn't the end all and be all. Well, now you have hedge funds buying newspapers, and everything is being stripped down to say, how can we maximize our revenue, our profit margin, those sorts of things. And I do think journalism has been hurt by that. Even when you look at it's just, I don't remember growing up and hearing about a left media and a right media, you know, and now that's all you have for the most part is media groups being characterized that way. And some buy into it because it's lucrative and it pays off. And that hurts. You know, I look at journalism today and honestly, there's a part of me that says I don't recognize it from when I came into the game. I really don't. Because there are things that people do that when we came into the game never could have been done, whether it's taking money from teams or taking money from athletes or, you know, the time that you spend with people away from a facility. There are just so many different things. I will say this, you know, I heard Steve talk about fairness and accuracy and those sorts of things. I always get this from people who talk about objectivity. And I want to make this clear from my standpoint, whether people agree with me or not. There is no such thing as objectivity. Look, we all bring our life experiences to whatever the story is that we're covering. And that's going to impact and color how we write a story and how we report a story. The way that Steve saw what Colin Kaepernick did and the way that he reported it was different, I believe, than how a white reporter would have reported that had he seen it first and had he reported on it first. So his life experiences played a role into how he reported that story. And I think that that's the way, to many respects, journalism is today. And I don't think that's bad. Again, I don't think there is such a thing as objectivity, but I do believe that's where the fairness and the accuracy and those things come into play. And I also believe that it is important, coming full circle here, to the diversity issue, that you have people with different life experiences in management positions who can say, wait a minute, I see what Steve is talking about. I know what he is talking about. And therefore, we are gonna present it this way, as opposed to someone who may not have had those life experiences and says, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. And, one quick, for instance, when you read people talk about mainstream shows as if everyone has seen them, whether it be a Friends or The Office or something like that. And it's okay to put that into your copy and to put that into the narrative. But let one of us put a reference to Martin or Living Single or one of those shows in our copy, and we get I don't get it, and therefore we need to take it out. So again, I'm going back to, this is why it's important to have different people with different life experiences in these decision-making positions so that you can be fully representative of your audience.
This is Danny. I want to state that for everyone in the audience today, listen, please go check out Huddle and Flow podcasts, and please read up any material, support Steve and Jim. They have phenomenal insight in what they're going to provide for you. I want to ask, as we're closing up, and I really want to thank you both today for your time, to joining Dave and I on our Twins Talk It Up DSB Leadership podcast. What other great future projects can you help our audience understand about what you guys are working on that's in the works, outside of just catching up on finding out about you guys on Spotify or anything about your podcast? But what other future projects or things do you guys have in the works that you might want to be able to share with our audience?
Well, quickly, the podcast.
Yeah.
All the NFL podcasts were sold to iHeartRadio without our knowledge. So I guess iHeart is, should be getting the plug.
There you go.
We haven't heard anything about it, so I don't know. But look, I mean, everything, that's a great point. Jim and I kind of waiting to hear. We're waiting to hear the direction of this is kind of one of the points. There is no off season in the NFL, but as you prepare for an upcoming season, the direction where things are going, right? You always hear about digital, which is great, but you still have to produce content. How's that going to be produced? Yeah. The digital, the linear, the written word, those are all just vehicles on how to convey the message. So look, we're hoping, to get back, to spread the messages that we spread and having the great interviews and telling the stories. But in terms of specifics, I think there's a lot of question mark bubbles just trying to figure out exactly what the next steps are going to be. But Jim and I will be there to deliver, collaboratively and individually what needs to be delivered and to continue to bring the message and tell the stories that need to be told.
Yeah, COVID has changed so much that it's hard to figure out what the next step is because you still don't know what the rules of the game are.
Right.
I always say that, tell me what the rules of the game are, and then I can figure out how best to succeed. And at this point, we don't know what access is going to look like. It's access is everything, in our business. So all I can say to you is that from my standpoint is just to continue to try and bring people compelling stories and stories that maybe not everyone else is doing. I think you get to a point in life where you get to a certain age or there's an incident that stops you in your tracks and makes you think, or at least I'll speak for myself, made me think kind of like, what's your purpose now? You've been doing this for, like I say, since '86. So what's really your purpose in this business? What is the legacy you want to leave behind? And for me, it started with Steve's story about Colin and seeing how he was portrayed wrongly by so many people who couldn't look past the fact that he was kneeling during the anthem, let alone it was a former Green Beret who told him that it would be most respectful to kneel as opposed to sit. We tend to forget that. Yep. But I just felt this sense of responsibility to say, you know what, my purpose is to try and tell these stories from a perspective that others aren't, and to be real with that, no matter the consequences. And so I've tried to do that. For me, I'm going to start teaching in the fall, and I look forward to that in terms of having an impact on the next generation of journalists and at least trying to give them some perspective maybe that they hadn't had. And but to answer your question, I don't know. I don't think any of us knows where all this is going, because the people involved who are making decisions don't know where this is all going.
Right.
And I'm eager to find out. Trust me. Steve will tell you, we've been home. The last time I got on a plane was, I believe, February of 2019? No, 2020, February of 2020, coming from the combine in Indianapolis. I haven't been on a plane since. I haven't gotten in front of a team since then, other than a virtual call. So, you know, I don't know what all this looks like. But I just think one way or another, we have to find a way to keep bringing compelling content to our audience.
Yep, you guys have a challenging task, that's for sure. I want to say that on behalf of David and myself on our Twins Talk It Up podcast, we are both grateful to have two excellent representatives in the industry today, two excellent journalists, Howard University graduates on our podcast today. And I want to say back in April, your early April podcast, you had one of my favorite quarterbacks of all time, Warren Moon, on. Yeah. And this is what I talk about. You guys give the insights that no one else does. He had talked about how he had to keep a fingernail file with him, right?
Spin that ball.
What is that? So you get these insights. How, I mean, he threw one of the most, probably the most beautiful spirals and ever. Now you have some quarterbacks who just have a strong arm, but that ball comes out so wildly, it's horrible. But then you got others, when they throw the ball, it is like a Picasso in motion. And it's beautiful. And you guys always have these insights that you provide. I want to just say, on behalf of David and myself, we're grateful that you took some time out today, Steve and Jim, to join us on the Twins Talk It Up podcast. We are grateful to have you guys on. Look forward to just following up on your future projects, following up on your teaching that you'll be doing in the future. And just hopefully, I hope that you guys will be able to get more access in the future, get on some planes. I know I miss traveling as well. In my field, we always travel to our clients and haven't been able to do that at all. And I'm all zoomed out. I'm going to be honest. I'm just zoomed out. But we just want to thank you guys so very much for just coming on our podcast today, really talking about your background, what it was like growing up, what it's like getting into the journalism field, going to an HBCU, having your own podcast in the past, and the Huddle and Flow, and then really to be able to see your interaction with each other. It almost reminds me of my identical twin brother and I, how we both just worked well together. We both went to Howard as well, even though I was part of the better school at the School of Engineering, and he was
School of B.
But School of C. School of C. School of C. Come on, School of C.
What? They never came down the hill, Jim.
We did. Never did.
We want to thank you so very much for joining our podcast today. And on behalf of all of our listeners, thank you so very much. And stay tuned. You guys have some great projects coming up, and we hope to report on that in the future episodes. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Steve. And I do hope that we can collaborate more in the future. You guys are wonderful.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you having us, man.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. We'll get this out to you guys shortly. God bless and stay safe out there.
You
All
too.
Right, you too.
JT, I'll hit you up a little bit later on too. Great news on that teaching gig, bro.
Yeah, I want to hear about it.
I appreciate it. Yeah.